important subject actually that we come together to discuss. I mean, to my mind, it's very important subject, but I do. I mean, we had an email chat conversation with Rahat before, and I mean, many issues, many things happened in Central Asia. I mean, when we announced this topic, so I do agree that this topic is perhaps not most important topic that we have right now in Central Asia, because we had a revolution happened in Kyrgyzstan in the beginning of October, but we announced this topic, I mean, months ago. So which is why we had to stick, I mean, to the schedule that we announced earlier. But anyway, so I do appreciate, I mean, colleagues, that you I mean, agreed to join us for this conversation on energy transition. So we have a great panel of speakers today. So Alexei Kobzov will take the lead and introduce everybody, I mean, to the broader audience that we have joining us today in this conversation. So Alexei Kobzov, just in terms of introduction, Alexei Kobzov is a project manager at the Institute for Natural Resources at the German Kazakh University. He's a great expert. Has a great expertise or experience in working on energy resources, on renewable energy resources in Central Asia. And I'm very grateful to you, Alexei, that we have agreed to moderate this session, because I myself am not an expert on energy transition, which is why I ask you, I mean, to take the lead and do this in my stead. So. In terms of organizational issues, so colleagues, so if you, not only the speakers, but the audience who joined us, I mean, we have altogether how many? We have certain people right now on this chat. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand. I mean, do not ask for us. I mean, to ask you for questions or to prompt you for questions. Just raise your hand and ask a question. So we have this option. At the bottom of the screen, you have this, I mean, option, I mean, to raise your hand. Just if you have any, or put your questions on the chat, so we'll bring your question into discussion. So
yes, it's only.
Yeah, Alexei, would you like to pick up here?
I would like to ask the one question. It's please give the host the rights I Sulu, because sometimes people ask me to get access to join to conference, and I need to do it, and I think I need to more concentrate on the process of moderating.
Yeah. I'm not the host of this event, so of this conversation. So SI Sulu is doing this. Yeah.
Okay, you and I Sulu maybe can to join with any new person. Okay, good. Okay, good evening, good afternoon, maybe good morning if some of people now in the London or any places. And today our DKU talk presents really the interesting topic. It's energy transition, and energy transition is a very interesting topic for all Central Asian countries, because as you know, with all Central Asian countries is striving to meet their commitment to national goals for climate change mitigation and active development of green energy. However, the progress in development of green energy in Central Asia countries differs significantly, absolutely. And outdated power grid infrastructure and inadequate power generation have left thousands of people without reliable power supplies. But renewable energy and energy efficiency measures could give the thousands of people more reliable energy supplies, energy and electricity. Yes, and Kazakhstan, of course, is now in the lead in the use of renewable energy sources, and maybe we can also to discuss with some of the participants with this point, but I think it's still really interesting point to discussing. But really now Kazakhstan has this almost 1,650 megawatt installed capacity of renewable energy sources, and this is absolutely maximum. If we will compare these numbers with another Central Asian countries, and this goal is to reach 3,000 megawatt of total capacity, installed capacity on green energy power plants until 2025. Uzbekistan has attracted many investors in the sphere of renewable energy, and there is a number of renewable energy stations built now. There is a real need to additional energy sources because it's sometimes it's lack of electricity in different regions or different provinces. Also, several big research centers in Uzbekistan. It's, for example, the International Solar Energy Institutes and other research institutes. Turkmenistan is no critical needs in development of renewable energy in terms of energy supply because a lot of resources of gas, first of all, the gas and also the oil. And Turkmenistan developed system of gas power plants. There are only small experimental installation of renewable energy in Turkmenistan, but it's also one of the challenge for Turkmenistan. It's sometimes to give the very reliable electricity resources for different remote areas of Turkmenistan. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan is the same situation, a lot of hydropower resources, and it's really little oil and gas resources. And all Central Asian countries now will have this challenge to development of renewable energy sources and to go to energy transition. Well, of course, it's Germany, Japan, and United States and other countries. It's really a lot of measures, a lot of steps in this way. And now we have these three very interesting speakers in Central Asia from different countries. First of all, I would like, with my pleasure, it's Professor Bernd Delakovic. And maybe some of people also knows him because it's also sometimes it's not the first DKU talks where Professor Delakovic has this pleasure to give their knowledge and to share experience, many years experience. And Professor Delakovic is dealing with the topic of climate changes many years. It's a professor of University of Applied Science, Kyrgyzstan, and it was until 2019 the professor of University of Applied Science, Kyrgyzstan, and Life Cycle Assessment, Department for Life Cycle Assessment, Environmental Law, and Operational Environmental Management. And many years, 15 years, he was the Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science and Director of the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Protection. And of course, Professor Delakovic led numerous research projects in the field of environment protection with the focus of areas of global climate change, renewable energy, etc., etc. And Professor Delakovic holds regular lectures at numerous international institutions in different countries: England, Sweden, Poland, Mexico, Russia. I think it's maybe all different countries, exclude Antarctica. Okay, and now with pleasure I give the floors Professor Bernd Delakovic. Yes, floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you very much, Alexei. Thank you very much, Serik. Can you see the slides? Can you see the slides? Is it okay?
Yeah. Okay,
very good. I will try to use my maximum of 20 minutes. So, I thank you for the introduction and for the chance to have a little talk in this DKU talks, which is very interesting. I would have loved to be in Almaty at the moment, but it's of course with Corona, it's not possible, And we have a lot of increase in Germany, as you may know, and in Central Europe as well. So the situation with the energy transition. First of all, I would like to give you very briefly just a few slides about global population, about the motivation why we do need energy transition, and there is no alternative to do that. And then there, just one slide, not only because of climate change and the global warming, but also because we are running out of gas and oil and fossil energy sources. I will present a small model to demonstrate that. And of course, some very few information about the situation currently about global warming and climate change. And then I will swift over to the second chapter, which is the energy transition. What have we achieved so far in Germany? On which method or which basis? And what would be the success that we have so far, but what is also the barriers and the challenges which are ahead of us? So let me start with the situation of the world population at the moment. As you can see here in the slide, we are at the moment currently about 7.82 billion people living on the planet. And if you go back and see how it was in the beginning since 1960, even before that, I was born in 1953, it was 2.7 billion people. Now we have the population that has tripled in my lifetime. This is about 5,000 new people arriving on the planet every 30 minutes, and this is the netto number. So that ends up with about 225,000 a day and a little more than 82 million people new on this planet in 1 year. The prediction for the year 2050, in the middle of the century, is very conservative approach, is about 9.6 billion. And by the end of the century, it might be even something between 10.5 and 11 billion people living on the planet. And of course, more people need more energy. And that's why we have to cope with the problem. And so far, if we just look in the global situation, when we just look at the primary energy, which is consumed around the globe, then it's still in the range of a little more than 80%, which is based on fossil energy sources. When it comes only to electricity, it is a little better. It's about 60, a little more than 60% on a global scale. But if you look into the prediction in the future, then you can see that we have an increase of renewable energies by the year of 2040, but still the dominating energy sources in that year will be petroleum and natural gas, and also coal with a slightly decreasing slope. And the role of nuclear is totally unclear. It's a big question mark. We don't know exactly what will go on in that field. We know that China is doing a lot of work in nuclear energy, Russia maybe too, and nuclear, and also the United States, France, of course. But it's still a big question mark. We don't know what the situation will be. But this is this econometric models, which I have already presented last year, which is very impressive because it combines a number, or it combines different data. It combines economic data with ecological data and with resource data. So it is based on the assumption that all energy which is used on the planet is based on fossil energy, which is not the case, I mentioned. But about between 80 and 84%, this is what we have currently in the fossil energy consumption. It is based on the assumption that in the year 2008, we did have 6.7 billion people living on the planet. And by the middle of the century, it's assumed that it'd be very conservative, 9.4 billion people, maybe a little more. We're not quite sure, but it might be in this range. And then it is based on the assumption that we have proven reserves of fossil energy sources like oil, gas, and coal. And in this model, also uranium is included, although it is not a fossil energy source. And also the second slope will be the ultimate recoverable reserves. That is what we believe we have, but we have not proven it so far. And then also we have a assumption in that model with an energy efficiency improvement of 1% per year, and two economic models. One is based on a very moderate increase of economy in the global scale of 1.5% per year, and the other is a more optimistic approach, which is based on a 3% economic growth per year. And if we put all these things together, we end up with those two steps are, those two curves are referring to the proven reserves. This is what we exactly know and what we can get out of the underground and can make a use out of it. This is the end of oil, gas, and coal, the predicted end of the proven reserves based on an economic increase of 3% per year, and this is 1.5 per year. And the other two curves is the proven reserves plus the resources which we believe we have. That means, again, 1.5% and 3%, but as a result of that, even if we have a moderate increase of economic growth of 1.5%, and if we count together all the proven reserves plus the assumed recoverable reserves, then we will have, in about 120, 130 years from now, we will coming to an end of the fossil energy sources, including uranium. And that is, of course, not a good message. So we should be much more careful with what we have. So coming to very few information about global warming and climate change. So far, this was taken from the IPCC report from 2000, published 2014. And this is a table demonstrating the amount of CO2 equivalents which is emitted by producing 1 kilowatt hour value of from different sources. So if you can see, if you have coal, this is a mixture of soft coal and hard coal, we have an emission, an average emission, a median of about 800 grams per kilowatt hour, which is produced. When it comes to gas electricity, then we have about 500 grams per kilowatt hour. When it comes to biomass, it's 230. And photovoltaic, it's 50, around 50. And then you can see that hydropower is 24, wind offshore is 12, wind onshore is 11 grams, and so on. Nuclear would be 12. And this is a emission concentration which is based on a life cycle approach. So from that, we know very clearly we should go away from those kind of production of electricity to the more or much lower zero emitting methods, which you can see here, like of course photovoltaic, wind, and hydro. Looking into this, we can see that in last year February we did have about 410 parts per million of CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere. When I was born, 1953, it was about 100 ppm less than we have now. And the thing is that the amount of CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere is, of course, contributing towards a greenhouse gas effect all over the world. That means it's contributing to a warming of the global atmosphere. And of course, it's not everywhere warming. It's of course also that we have some severe and very serious weather events with floodings and etc. You all are familiar with that. But the situation that we had in this year because of the COVID-19 lockdowns in many countries, you may be aware of the fact that Germany is having a second lockdown starting on next Monday. It was just decided yesterday with our government that we will have a new lockdown, more or less a new lockdown for at least 4 weeks, because our numbers of infections are very, very high. Today it was more than 16,000 within just 1 day. You know, so we had a reduction of emission by about 17% in April and March this year. But in the long term, this reduction may not really have a big impact on the situation of global warming. So if you just go back and look into ice core data, which we have some oxygen 18, oxygen 16 isotopic data, which gives us a hint of what was the temperature during that time, then we can see that the temperature, the Antarctic temperature, this is measured from ice core samples from the Antarctic area. And you can see that the CO2 equivalent and the temperature during the last 800,000 years were correlating very, very positive. So there is absolutely clear, if the CO2 is high, the temperature is high, and if the CO2 is low, the temperature is low. What we don't know exactly is what was first. Was first an increase of greenhouse gases, and then as a consequence the temperature was rising, or was first a rising of temperature and then as a consequence the greenhouse gases were rising. But what we know for sure is we are now here, and during the last 800,000 years we have never had this high concentration of CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere, which is of course very frightening. And then we have some new data, a study which was published in April last year. No, this year. No, I think it was this year. I'm not quite sure. We will see. It was last year. It was April last year. It was published last year. And that goes even back to 3 million years based on isotopic data in sediments, giving us the information that the temperature and the CO2 equivalent which we observe right now has never been that high during the last 3 million years. So this is really, really exciting and really frightening. And another big thing which we have to consider is that the permafrost in many parts of the world, mainly in Siberia and Russia, but also in Alaska and the northern parts of Canada, is melting, is thawing. And that is one of the reasons why Russia's President Vladimir Putin last year in his press conference on 19th of December has told the international press that yes, there is a global climate change, there is a global warming, and yes, Russia is more affected by the factor 2 or 2.5 than the rest, than many other countries. And that is because of the thawing of the permafrost, of course. Right. So let's go to the energy transition. What we have done so far in Germany, we have started in the year 2000 with a new, at that time it was a new act, the so-called Renewable Energy Sources Act in Germany, Erneuerbares Energiegesetz. And we have started with that. It's a kind of a pool system. I will come back to that in a minute. And we have also decided after the Fukushima accident in 2011 to phase out of nuclear power until December 2022, which I personally think was not a clever political decision, but anyhow it was done. We have also just last year decided to phase out coal as well, not later than 2038 or even earlier. So we have just got a lot of funding, a lot of money for the transformation process in some areas. And since December last year, we have a new so-called Climate Protection Act. And there you can see in this picture how it looks like. So fossil energy sources are still dominating, but they are going down quite quickly. And nuclear power is ending in about 2 years from now. And the renewables should become larger and larger and larger. This is what we are intending to do with the energy transition. And the main features of our Renewable Energy Sources Act is a feed-in tariff. That means everybody is putting money into a pool or into a pot, let's say a big pot, and this money comes from the electricity bill. So with each kilowatt hour of electricity which is consumed by any consumer, he or she has to pay 6.5 euro cents out of 30 euro cents, which is the equivalent of 1 kilowatt hour, which we have to pay in Germany at the moment in an average. So 6.5 euro cents per kilowatt hour goes into that pot, and from that pot we are taking out the money to promote and to foster and to subsidize the generation of renewable or low carbon or zero carbon energy sources. And this is the target for the middle of the century. We want to have about 80% of electricity from renewables, which is, well, I think we can do that quite easily. You will see it in a minute. And reducing emissions by 80 to 95% by the middle of the century, which is maybe not so easy to achieve, but we are I think we are on a good way. And this, for those who are generating, renewable energy or electricity from renewable energy sources, they get a guaranteed amount of money for a certain and guaranteed period of time. It used to be 20 years. Now it's less than 20 years, but still it's guaranteed. So this gives you the security to go to your bank and ask for money for investment. So this is what we have to pay for that, as I just told you. This year is about 6.7 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And so this is the amount of money which goes into the pot every year, which we have spent and invested to subsidize renewable energy sources, electricity during the last, let's say, 20 years, maybe a little less than 20 years. So this is the amount of electricity which we have installed, the capacity of electricity which we have installed. This is renewables, this is fossils, and it goes back to the year 2018, and you can see it goes down to a declining slope. And you see already that more than half of it is already from renewable energy sources. And you have to know that those more than 200 gigawatt is just the installed capacity. Usually in an average weekday when industry is working and everything, we need something about between 80 and 85, maybe 87 gigawatt is what we need. So we have enough we have enough safety. So this is a very brand new number. Just the first half of this year, 2020, when we did have the renewable energies in this year, the electricity produced from renewable energies this year was already nearly 50%, as you can see here. Most of that was onshore wind and offshore wind, as you can see here. And so the amount of fossil energy sources is declining rapidly. But that was also because this year we did have a lockdown in industry, so that might be another reason for that. When it comes to the primary energy that we are consuming in Germany, not only electricity, we are not that good. We are only about 14, maybe 15%. The target for 2018 is 18%, for 2020 is 18%, which I don't know exactly at the moment whether we will be able to achieve it. When it comes to electricity, the target was 35%, and we are now at 48%. So we are very, very successful. But and also with the reduction of greenhouse gases, we had a reduction of minus 40% relative to the basis year or reference year of 1990, and this is also successful. Yeah, here you can see a very nice picture, though that is standardized to the year 1990 up to the year 2017. So this is the economic growth with the depression in the year 2009 of the financial crisis. So this is about 50% increase of our economy. At the same time, we have decreased our primary energy consumption and also our greenhouse gases emission. So what this picture says is it's a decoupling of energy from the economic growth, and that is possible. And we have more or less the same picture also for waste. One of the big challenges that we have is that we are not able to store the surplus of electricity from renewable energy sources, and days when we have a lot of it, we need storage technologies. And one of the technology which is under discussion is the so-called power to gas. So this is, you need hydrogen, which you can produce from water by the electrolysis. For that, you need a lot of energy. But that energy can come from photovoltaic, from wind, from the days when we have a surplus, which we have to give away usually to the Netherlands, because our grid is not big enough to store all of that. But then if you have the hydrogen here and the CO2 we can get from the CCS technology or from the gypsum production, and then we can create and generate artificial methane, which we then can put into our gas pipelines, which is more than 400,000 kilometers in Germany. So we would have a perfect storage system. The problem is with that we have just started, just a few years ago, with research and development on that technology, and we should have done that much, much earlier. So we need another couple and maybe another decade to have this technology available for everybody. So far, we don't have it. We have just a pilot plant here close to Hamburg, which you can see here, but it's not very successful. We need much more research. I'm quite finished now. I have just two more slides, and this one is about the grid. And this is another big challenge and another big barrier. We have most of our wind power, offshore and onshore, is in the northern part of Germany. But most of our industry, mainly the automotive industry, not like Volkswagen. Volkswagen is more or less in the northern part of Germany, but most of the industry is here around the Stuttgart area. This is Porsche and Daimler. Munich, Regensburg, here is BMW. Then here is Ingolstadt, there we have Audi. So most of the automotive industry is in the south and the southwest. And here is where we have the wind power, and this is Volkswagen here, it's around here. So we need to transport the electricity which comes from wind power from north to the south. We need transmission grids, and that is one big problem, because many people in Germany, they love the situation that we have an energy transition, but they don't want to have it in their backyard, and that is a big dilemma in which we are. So finally, we have spent so far about 500 billion euros, 500,000 million of euros already in the renewable energy sources sector. And this is about equivalent to 0.6 of Germany's gross domestic product per year, and we will need at least another 500,000 millions of euros until the middle of the century to fulfill the requirements or our goals in the Climate Protection Act. And this sounds very much, but it's not so much if you compare it to other countries such as China, which is spending a lot of money into the renewable energies sources. So come to a summary, the global warming is, of course, it's fact. We don't have to discuss about that anymore. And greenhouse gases from fossil fuels are major causes. We need to have energy transition to low carbon renewable energy sources. This is essential, but it's costly. And we have this system in Germany, which is kind of a pool system, as I've explained. This may serve as a sort of blueprint to other countries, that of course not at that high level of 20 billion, 15 to 20 billion euros per year, but if the price level is generally for living costs and for everything is lower, then also this mechanism would be cheaper, And a successful energy transition requires research into storage concepts, which you don't have at the moment, at least not very efficient one, and use of intelligent power grids, as well as decentralized supply. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm coming to an end. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this great presentation. And of course, it's my question is, we will give the floor for questions is after each presentation and maybe in the end. And I think it maybe why next presenters will give their presentation. If other participants could give the question in our chat. Yeah, I think so. This is the way. Or Serik, or maybe it's now the floor for questions. I think it's maybe in the end. Yeah, it's good.
It's up to you, Alice, because you as a coordinator, as a moderator of this
okay,
session, so
I think it's maybe now.
Don't forget to introduce our speakers here, Rahat and Farhod, please. Yeah, please do this.
Yes, of course. I think it's now. While some participants could write these questions is our chat. Now I, with my pleasure, give the floor for Farhod Amidjonov, Dr. Farhod Amidjonov. It's holders his PhD degree in global governance. It's Wilfrid Laurier University, Waterloo, Canada. Yes, and now Dr. Amidjonov is Assistant Professor, Department of International Studies, College of Humanities and Social Sciences. It's Zayed University. And Dr. Aminjonov has a significant experience also in teaching and research. For example, Dr. Aminjonov was a professor researcher, Department of Socio-Economic Disciplines. It's Narhos University in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and also senior lectures in OSCE Academy, and also assistant professor Al-Farabi Kazakh National University. And of course, it's significant research experience, expert of energy security and governance, and Central Asia Institute for Strategic Studies, Almaty, Kazakhstan, senior research fellow, Eurasian Research Institute, Ahmet Yesevi International Kazakh-Turkish University, etc., etc. And now, with my pleasure, I give the floor to Dr. Farhod Aminjonov, and please.
Thank you very much. Let me share the presentation. There we go. Thank you very much, Alexei. Thank you very much, Serik, for organizing and inviting me to this webinar talk. Today, I will be presenting, mainly focusing on Central Asian region, because this is my area of expertise. And I will be talking about renewable energy transition in Central Asia. And because we'll be talking about the entire Central Asian region, I will be focusing on some of the main issues. Basically, some sort of a policy recommendation for the governments where to start the transition, or at least for some countries which, have already started the transition, how to proceed. Okay, and this presentation derives to some extent from my recently published policy paper, which you can find here in the bottom left side of the screen, published by Kabar Asia. Okay, so in this presentation is divided into two parts, and I will answer two questions: how, why, and how. Why Central Asian countries are making or should make the transition to renewable energy sources, and how they should make this transition, where they should start this transition from. The question of why. What is the rationale behind the transition to renewable energy sources? Aren't we happy with our current energy security? Aren't we happy with our energy supplies? Aren't we happy with the prices for energy in Central Asian countries? Well, probably not, since the governments and the people keep talking about renewable energy sources. But not really that unhappy, since the transition is not really being accelerated, such as, in Germany, the case which is uncomparable to Central Asian countries. And you will see why. So the question of why. Why Central Asian countries should make transition to renewable energy sources? We'll go by countries. Kazakhstan. And each country is individual in Central Asia. Each country has its own specific characteristics. Each country is different, and each country has its own reasons. In Kazakhstan, 70% of the power generation comes from coal. And from the previous presentation, we have learned that the coal is the dirtiest of all fossil fuels. 70% of electricity being generated from coal, and coal basically comprises 45%, up to 45% of the overall energy mix for the country. Why would Kazakhstan use coal for power production? Because Kazakhstan possesses 4% of the world's coal reserves. Coal is located close to the surface. It's very cheap to extract, it's very cheap to mine coal. And the amount of coal with the current rate of consumption would last for 250 years. Unfortunately, coal is dirty. So the country is making a transition, has to make a transition to renewable energy sources. Kazakhstan, being part of the international community, has taken certain obligations. As part of the Paris Agreement, Kazakhstan has pledged to reduce its CO2 emissions by 25%. And actually, Kazakhstan's its own initiative, Green Economy, has set even more ambitious targets to reduce its carbon emissions by 40% by 2050. So Kazakhstan needs to diversify its energy sector because power production or the electricity sector of Kazakhstan is environmentally damaging. Why would Uzbekistan want to make a transition to renewable energy sources? As you can see from the circle on the bottom left, the main source of energy or the power production in Uzbekistan is gas. Uzbekistan is rich for gas. Yet, the graph on the top of this chart indicates that Uzbekistan consumes almost all the gas that it produces. And of course, Uzbekistan wants to export gas to the outside markets. And also, if you pay a closer look to inside energy security issues of the country, you will realize that inside Uzbekistan also has a number of energy shortages, energy cuts, and energy security issues, especially when it comes to harsh winter months. So Uzbekistan wants to make a transition to renewable energy sources because it wants to reduce its dependence on natural gas. Well, natural gas is cleaner than coal, but still it's not sustainable. Besides, for the past several decades, Uzbekistan has not discovered massive natural gas reserves, which means natural gas deposits in Uzbekistan is not going to last forever. And inefficient technology and efficient infrastructure implies that the transition has to be accelerated. And that's why Uzbekistan wants to make transition to renewable energy sources. Why would other countries in Central Asia want to make transition to renewable energy sources? For instance, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. These are Central Asian upstream countries, very rich for hydropower. And hydropower is, well, I wouldn't say renewable energy sources, but hydropower is clean, right? Hydropower is clean energy source. Yet you have to understand that the hydropower should be divided into two parts, large hydropower and small and mini hydropower. Small and mini hydropower is considered to be renewable energy sources, literature, and hydropower, large hydropower is usually considered as a separate energy source. So in Central Asian context, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they are primarily dependent on large hydropower. Large hydropower plants, hundreds and thousands of megawatts capacity. In Tajikistan, for instance, 97% of hydropower accounts for 97% of electricity production, and 98% of this electricity, more or less, of course, it varies, come from large hydropower. And when it comes to the renewables, it's not just about electricity supplies. Renewable energy sources, the function, the purpose of renewables goes beyond just the electricity supply. Decentralized renewable energy systems, they provide electricity to population centers, to the population spots, disconnected from the central power grid, located in far distant, areas. You can also add environmental aspect, you can add efficiency aspect, you can add security aspect, you can add health related aspect. You can add economic aspect to it. So renewable energy goes beyond just electricity supplies. Large hydropower is not necessarily renewables. We'll talk about this later on in the slides. So that's why Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, they also should and they want to introduce renewable energy sources into their energy mix. Because of energy insecurity, in those hydropower-rich Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, over the past several years, the country, to meet growing energy demand, especially in cold winter months, because their energy systems are quite vulnerable to seasonal energy production or power production, they have increased their coal consumption, which is contradicting their sustainable development goals. Isn't that a good reason for them to introduce and develop renewable energy sources? So they are rich for hydropower, but hydropower, large hydropower, can produce electricity during summer months, but they are large hydropower, because of this, specific characteristics of the existing energy system, is quite limited for electricity production in winter months. They have to increase the consumption of coal. They have built coal power plants, which is affecting the environment, which is not sustainable, which goes against sustainable development. So even those upstream countries rich for hydropower, they are along the way and they talk about introducing renewable energy sources. And of course, climate change. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan glaciers, they are main sources of water supplies to all Central Asian countries throughout the Central Asian region, with impact on water security, food security, health security, energy security. And over the past half a century, 30% of all those glaciers, which are actually, which are the source of water supplies through major water streams, have disappeared. Being vulnerable to climate change impact, scientists forecast that those glaciers, they will continue disappearing, and this region may end up being in a very difficult situation. Of course, renewable energy sources will not be the only solution, but at least they may contribute, they might mitigate the impact to some extent. So these are the reasons why Central Asian countries would want to introduce renewable energy sources. And renewable energy in Central Asia will allow these countries, first, to meet rapidly growing energy demands, and the energy needs in all Central Asian countries are growing. To reduce environmental impact of the fossil fuel consumptions in all 5 Central Asian countries, even those rich for hydropower, and address energy security risks, and especially for those people and those population spots which are disconnected from central power networks. Unfortunately, until today, the only country which has made significant progress in introducing renewable energy sources is Kazakhstan. All other countries are falling behind. How and why? Let's go through each of the cases. So Kazakhstan, as you can see, has made a significant progress. A lot of scientists, experts, they were actually quite careful forecasting and predicting. They were not sure if Kazakhstan, would be able to meet 3% target of introducing renewable energy sources by 2020. And that was the talks 5 years ago. But Kazakhstan made it. By 2020, Kazakhstan now has total installed of more than 1,000 megawatt capacity of renewable energy in the country. And that's more than 3%. And by 2050, Kazakhstan wants to increase the share of renewable energy sources up to 50%. And again, I'm not going to argue about this. Perhaps this is a little bit ambitious goals. But if Germany wants to increase its renewable energy sources up to 90%, perhaps Kazakhstan can make it up to 50%. Right? But this will require a lot of money. Making initial transition was primarily based on the government support. Feed-in tariffs, some sort of feed-in, tariffs introduced by the government. The government created a special institution. This special institution supported all those investors willing to promote renewable energy sources, guaranteed purchases of electricity from renewable energy facilities. Was a triggering point. However, in the longer term, to achieve 50% transition, the government alone may not be able to sustain the cost. The green plan that the government has set forward, 2015-2045, according to different estimates, would require up more than $90 billion. And of course, these numbers, they are tricky, but again, it will require a huge amount of money that the government alone would not be able to make it, which means perhaps the contribution from all stakeholders, business, private sector, and the people themselves, the households, is crucial. So while in the initial stage, the government attempts, prove to be successful, in the longer run, engaging all stakeholders is crucial. And of course, in Kazakhstan, 84% of coal consumers, they live in the rural areas. Renewable energy sources would be able to replace coal and mitigate environmental impact on their house and improve their access to energy resources significantly. What about Uzbekistan? Uzbekistan has also set an ambitious, goal. Currently, the Uzbekistan energy balance basically accounts for less than 13 gigawatts of electricity production. But Uzbekistan wants to double it by 2030. To a large extent by introducing renewable energy sources and significantly diversifying its energy mix. We talked about the reason, we talked about the rationale behind it. But how can Uzbekistan make it? By introducing again and attracting investors from outside. And Uzbekistan has come up with several large-scale projects, especially focusing on solar energy. Look at this list of 100 megawatt capacity and more solar and wind energy projects. Two major problems with this list of major renewable energy projects of Uzbekistan. Number one, the amount of investments. Up to 2025, according to different estimates, Uzbekistan would probably need up to $5 billion of foreign investments, which is not that much money. Unfortunately, in case of Uzbekistan, there hasn't been a single successfully implemented large-scale renewable energy project so far. In the absence of a precedent, no investor would probably want to risk, his money coming to Uzbekistan. So for Uzbekistani government, it's crucial to establish a reputation of a reliable partner so that the foreign investors would come. Without the money of the foreign investors, Uzbekistani government would not be able to make this transition by itself. It's very important. Central Asian upstream countries are rich for hydropower, as we said. Technical, theoretical, as well as business potential. Unfortunately, it's not just about the hydropower. We need to consider the usage of small and mini hydropower, which is utilizing all small water streams to make sure that even the distant villages in far mountainous areas are provided with electricity, even those disconnected from central power grids are met. And Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan government, they have their own plans. There is a government agenda for that, for building small and mini hydropower plants. For instance, if you look at this chart, this is the list. This is the list of Tajikistani government small and medium and small and mini hydropower plants that the government has planned to build in between 2012 and 2016. And 90% of all those small and mini hydropower plants, they were built with the purpose of supplying electricity to distant villages, to the people residing in far distant villages, disconnected from central power grid. Unfortunately, there wasn't the proper assessment studies conducted, so that almost 60% of all those small and mini hydropower plants, when they were finished, the construction process was finished, water streams from which they were supposed to get the water were dried out by the time hydropowers were constructed. So, one of the major challenges for small and mini hydropower construction in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, despite huge potential, is research, assessment, and the monitoring mechanism, which has to be in place. And this is crucial. And it's not just for Tajikistan, it's also for Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan, according to different studies, there are almost 170 different rivers with total capacity of 1,600 megawatt for small and mini hydropower. You can build this small and mini hydropower. They will be providing for a completely different purpose. It's not large hydropower that you produce electricity and link to central power grid. No, you will build those small and mini hydropowers with the main purpose of supplying electricity to the population living in rural areas, up in the foothills, in the mountains, where it's very difficult to supply them with traditional fuel or with the electricity from the central grid. Provide them with some sort of energy security. But for that, in order not to waste the money, we have to conduct assessment studies and monitor the process accordingly. Renewable energy in Turkmenistan, last but not least. What for? Turkmenistan is rich for natural gas, but doesn't mean that renewable energy sources should not be a priority. In Turkmenistan, for your information, the only source of renewable energy so far is small mini hydropower plant called Hindikush, and this Hindikush has celebrated its 110th anniversary last year with the capacity of 1.2 megawatt. And this is the picture of Hindikush mini hydropower plant. As a challenge, I highlighted not enough government attention, but I tried to be politically correct. In fact, there is no government attention at all in Turkmenistan for the renewable energy sources. Recently built thermal power plants, gas-fired thermal power plants in Turkmenistan, they secured for the most part on the country level energy security for the country, right? But again, in the longer term perspective, not utilizing photovoltaic power potential of Turkmenistan is a crime. Look at this country, geography, solar radiation, the distribution of population all along the country, availability of the territory, everything is favorable for the development of solar energy. Which means first you can provide sustainable long-term clean electricity to the people. You can establish decentralized electricity, power systems which are more secure. You can provide electricity to the people in the regions and areas disconnected from central power grids. You can make electricity cheaper, even though it's still cheap. And also you can save gas for export and the government would make some money. So just because the government has a lot of natural gas, it doesn't mean that it should ignore renewable energy sources in the country. No money to phase out thermal power plants in Central Asia. That's the price component that we are talking about. Solar energy this year in 2020 has officially been declared the cheapest energy in history. Yes, it's the cheapest. Unfortunately, not for Central Asia yet. How come? When it comes to make a decision to build a new power plant, either from renewable energy sources or working or burning conventional sources of energy, then going for solar energy is definitely should be a priority. In Central Asian, realities, unfortunately, countries, they don't want to extend their energy sectors by phasing out thermal power plants and replacing their energy sector completely, like the Germany is doing. They want to keep utilizing existing, potential for as long as they can. And currently functioning coal-fired thermal power plants or gas-fired thermal power plants, they are quite cheap. So if you compare currently functioning coal-fired thermal power plant and the possibility to build solar power plant, of course, solar power plant and the electricity produced becomes more expensive. But in the longer term perspective, when you decide to build a new thermal power plant, then then of course the priority should be given to the renewables. Because the investment will be returned in 15 to 20 years, and then you will be enjoying clean, long-term sustainable energy almost for free, plus just operation cost in the next 50 to 60 years. Unfortunately, the main challenge is that renewable energy market in Central Asia has no comprehensive regulatory framework. Different to all Central Asian countries, but unfortunately, it's not working. And perhaps some of you heard power supply disruptions today in Bishkek city. I don't know what was the reason, right? But perhaps outdated thermal power plant, right, which has to be modernized or which has to be replaced. And if it comes to building something new, why not to utilize the potential for renewable energy sources? And renewable energy requires regulatory framework, new policies. And you can see here that in a number of countries there is a gap. There is a gap for quotas, there is a gap for mandates, there is a gap for metering, there is a gap for preferential rates. Except for goals, we all have our goals, but how to achieve those goals, there is no procedure, there is no action plan, which is a major challenge, which is a major barrier for Central Asian countries. We can set a goal, but unless we clearly understand how to reach those goals, that would be a very difficult task to accomplish. Once we start introducing renewable energy sources in large scale, then we'll face the problem of intermittent nature of renewables. It's not going to be a problem at the very beginning stage. Like Kazakhstan has introduced 1,000 megawatt capacity. Everything is being fed into a central grid. It's being disappeared into the central power grid, right? So it's there. You are not, when someone at home is turning on the light, you don't really notice. You don't see whether it's coming from renewables or from coal-fired thermal power plant. So you will feel the intermittent nature when the amount of renewables exceed the conventional sources of energy. Then, as many engineers highlighted, we will face the problem of the frequency regulations. Hydropower balancing might be a solution. We have Central Asian power system, centralized, interconnected. We have resource sharing mechanism, and hydropower has always been one of those mechanisms for regulation. The frequency changes in power supplies. And the Germany case, perhaps Professor can enlighten us, could be a good example. To my knowledge, Germany is also trading electricity with Norway, right? With some North European countries. Exchange of electricity, renewable electricity with hydropower produced in Norway, which is hydropower balancing for the purpose of frequency regulations and solving the problem of intermittent nature of renewables. The same mechanism could be applicable to Central Asian countries while talking about centralized energy grid. It could bring up some issue of geopolitics of renewable energy and some problems of interdependency. But I very much hope we've, passed this stage. And that's the last slide of my presentation, almost the last one. The main shortage of my presentation today is that, again, I place too much emphasis on the state and the state support. Perhaps the bottom-up approach or the business approach should be the focus of the presentation. But all the evidences suggest that, the triggering point should be the state and it should come from the state. Maybe next time I will be focusing on the bottom-up approach and more focusing on the people, as a driving force behind the transition. But that's a topic for another presentation. Thank you very much, and I would be very happy to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Farhod Aminjonov. And now I think participants can see the different point of view. One point of view from Germany, from European Union, and the point of view from Farhod Aminjonov. And now also we can have the pleasure to use the knowledge and to receive the knowledge from Dr. Rahat Saburbekov from Kyrgyzstan. Dr. Rahat Saburbekov is economist with extensive experience in policy analysis, research and modeling, with work experience International Finance Corporation, World Bank, Ministry of Economy, and other international and state organizations. Dr. Rahat Saburbekov is holder of a PhD in economics at the School of Economics and Business, Norwegian University of Life Science, and also a Master in International Policy Economy, University of Birmingham, United Kingdom. Dr. Saburbekov has his experience as a researcher in OSCE Academy in Bishkek. At the same time, is associate professor, economic department, American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan. And also it was assistant professor and also project coordinator. It's huge Kyrgyz Norwegian educational projects, and also economist and cost benefit analysis for livestock management, for economic and land degradation, GIZ projects, and many other research experience. And now I also with pleasure give your floors, Dr. Rahat Saburbekov, and please give your point of view on this energy transition for Central Asian and maybe some challenges and other points. Please.
Thank you very much, Alexei. I don't know, can you see my screen, I guess? Yes, great.
Yeah, we can see.
Great. First of all, thank you for invitation, and I would like to use this opportunity and thank Eric and our colleagues that it has been, I mean, to have some Central Asian discussion. It's very rare event. Yeah, we attend different European, American conferences, but it's rarely when we have the Central Asian event, and I think it's very important. So I thank you for organizing this event. Especially the topic is very important, regardless of the timing. Yeah, I would like to try not to repeat what has been said before, because two speakers previously said many things which were already in my presentation and the slides. So I tried to remove as much repetition as possible. So I will try to take a different angle and maybe try to be a little bit provocative. First of all, I guess, okay, let's start with the slide. So we discussed different determinants why we should move into renewable, and by consensus that it's clean energy, it's safe, it's less polluting, it's nice. So this was the main arguments. At the same time, a little bit different angle would be that clearly after the collapse of Soviet Union and recently starting from 2000, there is a huge demand in all Central Asian countries, both from residential sector, household consumption has increased along with GDP. Especially if you look at the data in Kazakhstan, it's really amazing the growth of demand in the residential sector. At the same time, the industry is also growing. In Uzbekistan, for instance, it's also, and the structure of the energy economy in all three Central Asian countries has kind of switched. If it were main consumer of the energy was industrial sector, now it's more about consuming, and the consumption has been growing, and energy demand from consumption for utilities, mobility, transport sectors has been growing, and it's driven mainly by income growth in these countries. Second determinant why the country should probably think about renewable, it's probably outdated energy infrastructure, which has been mainly inherited from Soviet Union. For example, the same thing with the buildings is large residential buildings which are in every major city of the former Soviet Union, or I mean in Central Asia as well, so-called Khrushchevkas, Stalinkas, large buildings, and the energy efficiency, it's one of the lowest in the world in terms of energy loss. They count by different estimates up to 60%. At the same time, the energy grid is also centrally planned, as was designed, not mainly by economic feasibility, but more also, let's say, in addition, about the political feasibility. So everything has to be centralized. So the way how the energy grids are designed, that there is a centrally generated energy which is distributed typically by one company. So it can be two companies. One is generating, for instance, as in Kyrgyzstan. The second is distributing, but still they're state-owned, and two companies doesn't make less monopolistic. So this is how the infrastructure was designed. Is it economically feasible today? It's probably very big question. Should we? And I'll talk about more about at the end of the presentation. And another thing is lack of regional cooperation. And Farhod, I think, mentioned that we have also inherited from Soviet Union this hydropower connections, and we exchange energies. But lately, if you look at the what has been going on, for instance, a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, Kyrgyzstan, for example, in our country, we also built additional power lines, so we don't need transfer our energy through Uzbekistan. The same process is happening in Tajikistan. So the countries are trying to become energy independent, not to have any loops through neighboring Central Asian countries. And renewable energy could be one of the ways. And of course, there is a water pressure. So due to climate change, I think Farhod also mentioned this. It's not reliable as we thought it was, and water is not only energy issue, but it's also of agricultural use. So we can assume that we will have also pressure not only on energy systems, but on food production systems as well. So need for alternative energy source has been increasing so far in the recent 10-20 years. And now let's take so that was the first part, was kind of macroeconomic perspective, yeah, from zooming out. If we zoom into the need for renewable energy from point of household on micro level, all 4 capitals in Central Asia, this was taken today, it's air pollution. Air pollution has become a major issue. Astana is not, Nur-Sultan is not here, sorry, at the moment in this graph, but I took the largest cities in terms of population. So we see that air pollution at local level in urban areas during the winter times, it's consistently is much higher than World Health Organization guidelines. It's been a case in Tashkent, which even in Tashkent, where most of the transport and the heating and the gas, it's a big issue in Almaty, Bishkek, and Dushanbe. And the sources of these pollutions are clear. It's heating, either for getting energy or producing energy, or just to get the heat, to heat the houses, or or rather, and the transport. So these are two sources, and these are main energy consuming from the household perspective. And it's also renewable energy could also decrease the dependence on the high polluting energy. And then probably the second one is demand. So public awareness has been growing, and many research in different countries show that there is a correlation between GDP growth and the demand for renewable energy. And we see this also in countries, especially in Kazakhstan, where highest GDP in the region and highest, let's say, production, at least at the moment, renewable energies. Yeah, still low, but it's very impressive in terms of given Central Asian neighbors. So, so this is a micro perspective. And then if we zoom out and then go even further into the international arena, as I think Farhod mentioned that it's international trend, and also in the first presentation, Professor Deleko has also mentioned that there is a Paris Agreement, climate change treaty is different, and it's happening. But I would like to mention one thing. It's not only that we are obliged to, and it's kind of trendy and a sign of international cooperation, but there is a cost, and the cost is coming really fast, so-called border carbon adjustment taxes. So this is the idea that of carbon club. So the countries, especially rich developed countries, will impose to the additional taxes for the countries which will have the which have carbon intensive goods. Let's say let's say Kyrgyzstan, which were textile, is our biggest import at the moment. Let's say if we drop the gold and now the mineral resources and vegetables, so we decided to export textile to those countries. There will be additional carbon tax based on our GDP intensity, on carbon intensity of our GDP, and this has been discussed for around 10 years, but it's coming more to the conclusion that some sort of climate club with some carbon tax is going to be implemented, especially when we talk about countries which have already declared carbon neutrality or climate neutrality by many in the European Union. I think two days ago, Japan declared the carbon neutrality. So these are costs associated with our government's decision to we still keep the dirty energy. And then the second part of the slides, I think it was also mentioned why we should do this. This is just the solar power. Do we have resources to produce, in this case, is solar energy? Farhod showed the Turkmenistan case, and if you look at the map, Central Asia in general is so-called dry lands or dry belt of the world, and we see that the potential is comparatively high. And if we zoom in, we see that there is a potential. I mean, it's you see that the radiation is quite high, and why we should care, you know. So primarily the reasons which were mentioned, it's big potential, hydra questionable in the long run, but probably it's still in the short run, it's still viable from an economics point of view. And then part of nationally determined contributions within the climate change agreements, such as Paris Agreement. And it generally increases well-being of the country, of the regular citizens. And is it probably, it is time, if we look at the cost of the production in the different types of fuels, we see that renewables, for example, solar has been a huge drop from, let's say, 2010, it was 0.3 US dollars per kilowatt. Now it's roughly the same as fossil fuels. So even the hardcore fossil fuel people were arguing that this is the fossil fuels are the cheapest, most energy intensive energy unit we can have. Now this argument is no longer applicable to the renewable energy. We see that solar power, in fact, is almost as cheap as fossil fuel. And then the same thing is happening in other renewable. Offshore wind has been dropping almost twice, and concentrated solar power, everything is falling except for hydro. Hydro has been increasing for lately in price. This is also related to the water pressure, and it has been increasing in terms of cost of maintenance for Central Asian countries because of its old, outdated infrastructure. I'm going to skip a couple of slides because we talked about it. Maybe one thing to mention that I think what has not been mentioned yet about the challenges. It has been mentioned that there are lots of opportunities, right? There was extensive arguments by both speakers that everything is going to be good. It's a future. We have the capacities. There is an international community demanding it. There is a good processes are happening. It's happening. But let's talk about. I agree that this is the future. This is what we have to be. But let's, since it's dialogue, maybe we can discuss also challenges. So first, of course, it's price and the cost. Low cost of energy in Tajikistan and in Kyrgyzstan specifically actually holds as it's a political question. It's a question of the political unrest, if you want. And then, so the price is the issue, or the rather cost. Legislative question, it's probably more about Kazakhstan, which has made the first steps, and from what I've seen, very successful. Especially I like that how the tenders are done for renewable energy projects. It's state-of-the-art online. It's really nice to see that something's happening in our region. But still, there are legislative issues. I was told, feed-in grid infrastructure issues. Land use policies, etc. Infrastructure, it's so-called, there is a term which energy economists used, carbon lock-ins. That basically refers to the situation when something is already built and we keep using it, and it's much more difficult to do something new. In this case, it's grid which is centrally planned and built, buildings which are least energy inefficient. So if we want to install, let's say renewable, let's say solar PV panels on household, that means that infrastructure of these multi-stored regions, multi-stored buildings within the urban areas has to be rebuilt. And you cannot do it. The costs and feasibility, economic feasibility, is very low in the rural areas because of the low demand. So it has to be started in rural areas. But in urban areas, sorry, it has to be in urban areas first because of the high density of population and demand and high income capacities. But at the same time, you have a problem where you have to redo the infrastructure. Transport. This is in terms of mobility provision, in terms of switching to EV, electric vehicles. This will also require some grids, some road infrastructure. So at the moment, it's much cheaper to use some kind of hybrid forms at least. But then if we are serious about renewables and we are serious about going to EV, that means that we need to invest into infrastructure. And then institutions. Institutions, I think, are important in terms of awareness raising and how the renewable energy should be rolled out. Do we need to be, should it be done by the government, or should it be done by the private sector, or should it be done in the public sector? And then one of the challenges in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan I see is awareness, simple awareness. I wonder how the Kazakhstan got the policymakers to invest so much attention and funds into the renewable energy. Maybe you could share enlighten us. But in case of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, it has been very conservative in terms of energy production. And last, my slide, I would like to raise questions rather, and maybe discussion points. So who should pay for it? Can let's say, countries with high debt ratios can pay? Or should it be done by the private sector? Should it be centrally produced, or should it be local, many local points? And this is important in terms of how our political systems and our democracies are run. The government in our countries, at least in most of our countries, let's say if you take Turkmenistan, is the government provides everything, right? So if the government gives energy provision to private sector, it is no longer powerful politically, right? And it's an authoritarian country. It's one version extreme. Other extreme is, let's say, Kyrgyzstan. I'm sure we are quite happy personally witnessing today's little catastrophe, or let's say little event on the thermal power plant today. The funny thing that it's centrally heated. So around 15 minutes we didn't have power in most of the city, and this power plant was built indeed in the Soviet Union, but it has been modernized 2 years ago, and they used like $400 million to renovate and build new capacities. So nothing serious has happened, but it's also vulnerable. It's centrally planned. We would rather, personally, I would rather have multiple sources of energy and be safe. So, and this is a question of the policy, not only economic but rather political question. Should be the electricity production to outsource to many small companies, one large company, how it will affect the political situation? Are our politicians ready to give each household produce its own electricity? And then the third question, institutional setup. It's a long story. There has been lots of reforms done, but the way how it's organized now, at least in most of the countries, cannot meet in terms of both capacity, human capacity, institutional capacity. They simply cannot implement or roll out renewable energy projects at the moment. And politically feasible, is it politically feasible? Is there a support from local policymakers and general populations? Well, with all these risks, for example, I'll give you example of the thermal power plant production built by Chinese in Tajikistan. Well, there is a lots of questions about. There was been lots of questions about feasibility, pollution, but still the power plant was produced and built by Chinese investors. Yeah, so it was political decision. The same thing with thermal plant in Bishkek. It was also the credit from the Chinese, built by Chinese, controlled and given by Chinese as a loan. Again, regardless of the environmental concerns, regardless of economic feasibility, long-term projections, etc. Another story, these cascades of hydropower stations in Kyrgyzstan. The project, we announced the tender, and then Russian company came and they started building. They didn't let anybody in, and they've been lobbying that this can be implemented, but they started and then left it after a year for different reasons. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the reasons, but again, so regional politics, international politics is heavily involved in this direction. So nobody, China, for example, or other powerful institution or country, sorry, doesn't want to have multiple independent power grids, for instance. It's much more easier to have one large project installed, so you can have one inflow of either funds and influence. The same story, and I forgot to mention corruption, notorious corruption in Central Asian countries. Yeah, this is one of the also determinants of renewable energy is not interesting. Microgrids is not interesting for top minister there. Solar panels at each household, having solar panels is not very interesting. It's much more interesting for for a minister corrupt in I'm not saying that somebody is corrupt, but let's imagine if you're a corrupt minister, would you like to have $1 billion coming in one project, or would you like to have like $100 bills to install the panels for each household? And then there's question of feasibility. Okay, my time is up. Thank you very much for your attention, and please feel free to ask questions.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Rahat. And it's really the time is time is over, but it's really a very interesting presentation, all three presentations. And now we have 5 or maybe 10 minutes about for absolutely free discussion, and only to start this discussion I can read this one of the first question from our participants, Georg Kildiarov. To achieve development in the energy transition, energy efficiency measures are also important to consider. So, what kind of measures, regulations, financing, social projects should be implemented in case of Central Asia? And to start some discussion, I will give some also additional maybe information. It's maybe, as you know, it's 2019. It was like revolution year in renewable energy for Kazakhstan, and I think it's for all Central Asian countries, because it's the first year when the price from solar power plants will be the same as traditional energy. Yeah, you know, it's about auctions from Ministry Energy. Each year it's like auction for the building from private investors. It's new solar power plants, wind power plants, and hydropower plants, especially this year. And private investors give us plans and suggestions about this solar, wind, or hydropower plants. And last year it was really the first time when the price of solar power plants, it was the same with thermal power from traditional energy in Kazakhstan. I think it's like revolution year, and also it was really inspired neighbor countries, of course, and first of all in Uzbekistan, and now it's the big measures, it's state programs for development renewable energies. Okay, and maybe some of you would like to give the comments on the question, the Georg Kildiarov, and or other point of view you would like to share, please. And also our participants, please suggest any new questions. Okay. Any comments? I think maybe Professor Delakovic also have this very active in productive discussion with Timur Idrisov in our chat, and also it will some questions. Could DKU play a constructive role further development renewable energy sources? But I can be, maybe I would like to answer these questions a little bit later. Please.
Yes, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Okay.
No.
Thank you very much, Marco.
Please.
I just wonder about the situation, especially, I understand that the situation in Central Asia is not easily comparable with situation in Central Europe, of course not. But the situation in Almaty, I've been there several times, and I think that Almaty has 3 points which I would like very briefly to address. That is, there is a large potential for hydropower in the south, from the mountains, you know, and there is also what I think a large potential for wind power in the north, in the plains. And I was not so familiar with the solar power that the price dropped down so significantly. So that is an additional thing. But then the air quality in Almaty is known to be very, very bad, not very good, you know. So there are a lot of reasons that metropolitan areas such as Almaty could or should or even have to change the so far mainly based fossil energy sources into renewable energy sources, or low carbon or zero carbon sources. What do you think? Is there a potential to do that? Or is there political will to do there? Is there something like a public pressure or something? Or what?
Only short answer maybe from my side, and then Dr. Aminjonov, I will give your point of view. What about the policy of Kazakhstan? It's really sometimes different ways of discussions of this way, and one of the very good example, it's building the new thermal reconstruction of thermal power plants in Almaty, TETS-2, and also with different 3 ways will now it's suggested for discussion for public discussion. And this 3 way, it's transfer thermal power plants from coal to gas, and other way, and the 3rd way, but all 3 ways is connection with traditional power, and one of the arguments is to transfer this a lot of money on this sphere. It's why we need to give some reconstruction which will work in maybe only 10 years if we can give reconstruction which will be working maximum 40 years. But this is the main point of discussion with public, because it's really 10 years time, and after 10 years, it's technologies will go. It's really another way. It's and absolutely different. But in the same way, also the position of Ministry of Energy. Ministry of Energy, as you know, is the Department of Renewable Energy. Each year has a special action for building the new solar, wind, and thermal power. And it's really Kazakhstan has reached the NDC plans. It's and goals for 3% of renewable energy for until the end of 2020. Yeah, and of course different ways in different discussion. And now maybe also who would like to also the comments? It's Farhod.
Yep, sure. Yeah, so actually just to follow up on this discussion and answer Professor Burns' question about the case of Almaty, right? So this topic is actually a very hot topic, and it's been the discussion going on for years. What's the reason? What's the reason for this air pollution in Almaty? Right? Is it thermal power plant, or is it the transportation sector? Right, so and every year in winter, especially when the situation gets out of control, this debate rises. But then no definite answer is given, and of course it continues every year. So first they need to find out what's the source of this air pollution, right? And then the government, basically the local authorities, they have to come to basically to an agreement. So what's the source of this air pollution? They all have to agree. Then they have to tackle the problem, and the problem is not easy to tackle. It requires complex issues. Like Alexei was mentioning, it's not just about transforming electricity sector, right? It's not very easy thing to do. Making a transition from coal to gas, right? Combined coal and gas fired thermal power plant, still fossil fuels, right? So building large-scale solar power plants nearby Almaty would be a little bit difficult task to do. By the way, there are several solar power plants nearby Almaty, and they are quite small in scale. And even the wind farms, they're also quite small in scale. They will not be able to replace thermal power supplying electricity to the entire city. So the point that I want to make is that to make air quality better would require complex measures. Changing the transport or reforms in transport sector, right? Expanding the public transportation, perhaps switching to bikes a little bit more, expanding public transportation, coal and gas combined thermal power plants. We cannot disregard them completely. We should be using them whenever necessary. Installing as many renewable energy facilities around Almaty as much as possible. Introducing rooftop solar panels on all government buildings and perhaps all the newly constructed buildings as much as possible. All the newly constructed buildings, they might have their independent, heating systems. They might have their own independent, electricity supply systems, power generating systems with all the newly introduced technologies. So the complex measures have to be taken for Almaty if they want to address the problem of air pollution, right? It's not going to be just a simple transition from fossil fuels to renewables. Yeah. Please, Rahat. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a small comment about air pollution. We have the same issue in Bishkek, and I'm involved in a couple of projects. I have been involved in projects about air pollution. The same issue as Farhon mentioned. There's always the government saying, is it transport? Is it heating? Is it central heating? And I always tell, okay, guys, it doesn't really matter which one. You have very old cars, less public transport, and you have inefficient heating energy systems using lots of coal. So there is no point of knowing exactly which of those two contributes how much. Let's say if it contributes 30, one is 30, other is 70, or maybe 50-50, doesn't really matter. What matters is that we have old cars, nicely provided by our German friends, at least 7-10 years old, and emission standards are way beyond what is now in Europe, right? And plus it's also old cars. And then you have coal-based power plants inherited from Soviet Union, and then you have the old buildings who's using lots of heat. So it doesn't really matter, in my view, which one is much polluting more. The fact is they're both polluting, maybe as much, maybe a little bit more one the other one. But I totally agree with all the proposed measures, Farhod. But this argument, what pollutes more, is just a waste of time. Thank you.
Alex, I have a question. So thank you very much for your presentations. It was very very enlightening for me. I mean, because I don't know the subject. But one question is, I really like your argument, Professor Bernd, so that Germany cannot be used as a blueprint for countries like Kazakhstan or like Kyrgyzstan, because you're right. I mean, in terms of economic development, we're quite different from Germany. So we cannot afford, I mean, switching to renewables. I mean, we in countries like Kyrgyzstan, for example, as a low-income country, we cannot afford switching to renewables, as you can imagine. But my question is not this one. So you mentioned there are some targets that we have to meet. So by 2030, by 2030 we have to reduce the number of fossil fuels when used, and to switch to renewables. But even you in Germany, you were not able to do this. You mentioned only 14%. Yes, I mean, only by 14% you use. Or you in Germany use renewables only how was it in English? Only 14% of energy sources or energy is produced by renewables in Germany right now at this point. So I can imagine that we have this capacity, I don't know, by 2030. But what if we don't meet these targets by 2030? What are the implications? What is at stake if we don't meet these targets? Are there any sanctions in that case? So you, Rahat, you mentioned there is this carbon adjustment cost, and this costs are coming. I mean, is it that we have to pay if you don't meet this target? And you also mentioned that there is no obligation to meet that target, or there is no obligation to stay inside this Paris Accord. And we saw that the United States has withdrawn from this Paris Accord, and arguably it's possible, I mean, to withdraw from that accord. So what is at stake, and what are the implications if we don't meet these targets?
Yes, thank you for the question. One thing to make it again clear, we are on a good road when it comes to electricity production from renewable energy sources. As you have seen, we have already reached more than 48% this year in the first half, which is much more than our goal usually. That was for 2020 was a plus of 35% electricity from renewable energy sources. We are much above that, which is good. But the thing with the 2030 goals, and as I mentioned, I did not have the time to speak more about that, but last year in December, this new Climate Protection Act passed our legislation. So it's approved and it's in operation. And it started already, or it will start in January 21, so in about 2 months or 3 months, with a surplus of 25 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent, which is emitted by, for example, by the thermal power plants, by coal power plants. So they have to pay an additional, well, mainly if you produce 1 megawatt hour of thermal power, of thermal electricity, then it's roughly about 800 to 900 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. So this is close to 1 ton. And 1 ton of CO2 equivalent will have the price of 25 euros starting in January, let's say 35 to 40 euros in the year of 2030. So this is a political instrument to put pressure on the price of, let's say, dirty generated power in comparison to clean power. You understand? So we also have the European emission trading system. You may be aware of that instrument that we still have. And there is discussion since the Paris Agreement that the European emission trading system may become also a challenge for other countries, like in China, and some other countries are at least did not say no generally to a global emission trading system. So I think the only way to achieve a ambitious goal is to combine it with incentives, but also with sanctions. So if you don't do that, then you get punished by a higher price because you have to pay more for your production from thermal power. It was very much discussed in Germany, and were not only people saying hallelujah and wonderful, it's good. There were a lot of critics as well. But finally, we have passed that, and this is now a national legislation, and so we will see what will happen with that. But I'm quite optimistic that we can achieve the goals that we have set for 2030, based on that. And then your other questions was that maybe the Renewable Energy Sources Act, this feed-in tariff system, might be a blueprint for other countries. Of course, as you have seen the numbers, we have, through this system, we have collected a huge number of money every year since the year 2000, even especially during the last couple of years, it was relatively high. So up to 20 billion euros a year only from that system. This is not comparable. This is not comparable with countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so on. But general, the costs of living and also the cost of energy is lower in your countries. But that is not a reason, to my understanding, not to think about such a system in your countries on a much lower level. But it could be, I think it could be a blueprint. Why not? What is the reason against it? That people cannot afford it? I mean, if everybody has to pay in that system, just a little bit, just a few of tenges, into that system, that might have an effect. But I'm not sure whether there's a political will and also a public acceptance for that.
You're right, it's, at some point you're right. I mean, but Kazakhstan can afford. I mean, because I mean, can afford to switch to renewables. So Kazakhstan has this money, I mean, to invest into that. But countries like Kyrgyzstan, for example, how should they, I mean, cope with that challenge? Because they don't have this money to invest into renewables, and it's quite impossible for low-income countries like Kyrgyzstan to switch to that and to meet the targets.
Yeah.
And at some point, I also I lived in Kyrgyzstan for many years. I mean, before I moved to Almaty, and I remember, so every time in winter, so it was a problem every time the winter came. I mean, most of residents around Bishkek, they were not able, I mean, to pay or to use coal or to use electricity for space heating, for example, and they use coal. They use, I don't know, tires, etc., and all that polluted the air very much in Bishkek. And I mean, I don't understand the reasons why they did it, because most of that people did not have the money, I mean, to do this. So, I mean, there are lots of reasons, I mean, to consider, and one of them is, I mean, this situation of households on the ground. Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe I can chip in. Actually, last year we did a research about the energy transition, why the households keep using coal while the electricity is cheap, relatively cheap. I mean, it's cheapest in the region, but still cheap. So our conclusion was that it was a large survey. So in addition to the cost implications, there is also one important thing that the voltage of electricity is not enough to heat the houses during the winter time. At least initially, to heat the houses. Rich people with high incomes, they didn't use the electricity for heating, not because they were, not because it was cheap or it was expensive or something. No, nothing related to the money question, but more because the voltage in the system of electricity was weak, so they couldn't simply the heat. So here, I think that it's a good opportunity to actually to roll out the renewable independent solar power grid, so it can be kind of supporting the electricities, and they would be, so this is one of the reasons.
And also, if just to follow up, it's not, I think Central Asian governments, Central Asian authorities, they closely follow what's happening in Europe, because they are looking at Europe as a pioneer, right? So because they are in front lines in the transition to renewable energy sources. And it's not just about learning from their success, but it's also about learning from their mistakes, because they are investing in something and they're making mistakes. So we are way behind that. So we are looking at their mistakes and we are trying not to repeat. So if they are investing something, if they're actively using feed-in tariffs, and I'm pretty sure some of the European countries are not entirely happy about feed-in tariffs that they have applied in a large scale, right? So I'm pretty sure that some of the Central Asian countries wouldn't really follow that example. And even Kazakhstan, which used feed-in tariffs, switched to auction mechanism, right? So I assume Uzbekistan, in making progress in the near future, would probably try to stay away from feed-in tariffs and go directly to auction mechanism, in attracting investors to renewable energy sources. So yeah, in this sense, Germany, as an example, as a model to follow, could be a very useful for Central Asian countries as a case study, definitely.
Could you explain a little bit more? What does this auction mechanism mean? Is it a kind of piecemeal transition to renewables?
No, the auction mechanism, it's like, the auction for everything, right? So basically you have a project, and then you have a number of investors, and then they compete with, basically for the lower price for this project, and then you choose the best investor, which asks for the lower price, the lower cost for the project that you have to pay. They implement renewable energy, you pay them, and then you basically start running and benefiting from solar, wind farm, whatever, right? So the auction mechanism, you invite investors with the best option provided. Before it was feed-in tariff, everyone, any investor who would like to invest in renewable energy project could apply, and then they had a guaranteed, power purchase agreement for the next 15 years, right? For the price 5 to 7 times higher than the existing price. Exactly. You just apply, and then you have it 15 years. We will purchase. When the price for electricity was 6 to 7 tenge, we will pay 35 tenge for your solar electricity. And of course, those investors were more than happy to apply. The investor and the cost would be recovered within several years, and then they would definitely be in plus, right? With minimal risks. Now that's a slightly different mechanism, auction mechanism, where they have to compete. So they have to lower the the cost of the project. So that's different, right? That works for the advantage of the government. That works for the advantage of the government of Kazakhstan more than the investors.
That is exactly the mistakes you mentioned. We started that in the year 2000. And there was kind of a hype in 2008, 2009. Everybody wanted solar, on the roof, and especially the farmers. And they had fields and they had areas, and they made a fortune with that, because it was over and overpaid, But we learned from those mistakes, and now we have this auction system, as you have mentioned, and I think there was always a limited amount or quantity of energy, of green energy that was subsidized. It was very, very much, and the money that went into photovoltaic during the years 2008, 2009, 2010, and if you have seen what was the outcome in the whole energy power mix in Germany, then you could see that the money we put into that technology and the outcome that came out was not a good ratio. Was a very bad ratio. And so we learned from that. And then now we have this more or less market instruments like auction. Yeah.
Yes, and Kazakhstan used the same system its last 3 years, and this is really huge amounts in new renewable energy stations, which now is built in Kazakhstan, and each year it was built in. And now I invited all of you to see the next auctions in Kazakhstan, which will be demonstrated through the open source also. I think from YouTube and Facebook maybe also, and all people can see what is the next auctions for solar power plants and hydropower plants and wind power plants, and it was in November. I can share, of course, it's also the link for this auction, and you can see the maybe next steps for how the price of solar, wind, and hydropower plants will be go down. Yeah. Yes. Any comments? And I would like also to read some comments from Timur Idrisov, our very active participants, originally, as I know, from Tajikistan, but now maybe who lives in also in European countries. The question is only about the availability of funds from the state. The authorities must create conditions for investors and communities themselves to start investing in renewable energy. Yes, of course, and I absolutely agree with also the Dr. Bernd Delacoach, or also other speakers. And Gulzat, I have the question. Gulzat, could you give the floor? Yeah, please.
Oh, thank you very much for all of you for the information. I don't do a research on this in this sphere, just a personal interest. So I have a question to Professor Delakovic. So my question is that you said that for the renewable energy, it needs a very big amount of money, right? So my question is that can the Germany support that amount of money without the car industry? Is there another income that comes to support renewable energy? And I have another question to Rahat Saburbekov. Are there any kind of projects to build greenhouses, right? Because I'm myself from the northern part of Kyrgyzstan, where I grew up like for a couple of months without any electricity, and we didn't have even money for the coal, so we had to use the manure most of the time, Tezek, and probably you know it. And also sometimes the electricity was 200 soms, which is maybe 3 euros. And we couldn't pay that also. And I think the big and then the house was always cold in the winter. Are there any projects in Kyrgyzstan that to build greenhouses that it will be kind of more affordable for the people in the villages? Thank you.
Oh, okay. It's Professor Delakovic. You could the first to answer.
Okay, thank you. I'm not quite sure whether I have understood the question. Was the question about the role of the automotive industry in the energy transition? Was that your question, Gulsa?
Yes, it's related to it because when I go back to Central Asia, I see this, how it was mentioned already in the talk. I see a lot this old European cars, right? And so I see that's how the problem is circulating, right? So it's just a personal interest that I have been thinking about it myself. And so if there are any answers or solutions or there are any policies that European countries are thinking of controlling, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is an indirect influence on the automotive industry because, as I mentioned, with the Climate Protection Act, that means that all industrial branches that are generating greenhouse gases have to pay extra money, starting with 25 euros per 1 ton of CO2 equivalents. So the refineries which are producing gasoline for the diesels and for the car industry, that will have an effect on the gasoline prices starting in January. In about 2 months, is that in an average between 7 and 10 euro cents per liter, not a gallon, per liter, will be more expensive, will be increasing the price for gasoline. And that, on the other hand, will put motivation to change from traditional gasoline and diesel cars into plug-in hybrid or electric cars. And we have a lot of money from the state, from the government, for those who want to change from old cars into electromobility. So they get extra money from the state plus from the automotive industry. So an average car with, let's say, something like 40,000 euros electromobility car, you can get up to 10,000 euros from the state plus from the manufacturer. So it has some impact, but not a direct impact. So this is more or less an indirect impact through the automotive industry. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Okay. Second question about the greenhouses. Unfortunately, I don't know any one, but I might have some contacts through friends. So if you send me email, and I put my email in the chat, so you can send me email, and then I will try to connect you with the people who potentially know something. Thank you.
Alexei? I think we have some technical problems with Alexei. Colleagues, we're a little bit out of time. It's already 8 o'clock. So perhaps a very last question from the audience here. Any questions from the audience?
No more?
No more questions.
Okay. Yes, I'm here. I only changed my mobile. I think it's low battery. I'm sorry.
So Alexey, I was saying that we're a little bit out of time. It's already 8 o'clock. So
Yeah. Now I think it's almost 8, and I think it's maybe the last questions, and I think it was the last questions, and now the 8, and we are out of time, which was the gift for this discussion. And if no questions now, and thank you very much. First of all, our speakers, Dr. Delakovic, Dr. Saberbekov, and Dr. Aminjonov. Thank you very much for your time, for knowledge that you share with us and with participants. Thank you for active participation, Timur, Gulzat, and other participants. And of course, thank you, Serik and Aysulu, also who is organized this event. Thank you very much.
It's also a big thank you from me. So it was very nice to see you. So all of you, I mean, Bernd, Rahat, Farhod. So I hope to see you soon. So it's a bit challenging me to talk to you via screen and to have this kind of conversation. So it would be much easier and more effective, I mean, to talk to each other in a classroom, I mean, by seeing each other. So it's a bit challenging. So, but anyway, nevertheless, it's big thank you to you that you agreed, I mean, to participate in this DKU talk. So unfortunately, didn't have so much time for discussion. So anyway, so yeah, let's plan our next events and see each other in the near future. So stay healthy. Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care, dear colleagues, especially